This episode of Primitive Culture is brought to you by Audible.com, offering more than 180,000 titles for smartphone, tablet, and desktop. To get a free audiobook of your choice and to help Trek FM at the same time, visit audibletrial.com/trekfm. And also by Enterprise in Space, an international program of the non-profit National Space Society. Find out how you can help science and education and become a virtual crew member aboard the NSS Enterprise Orbiter by visiting enterpriseinspace.org. And if you want to join the conversation and share your thoughts on this episode, join the Babel Conference, our listeners group on Facebook. Just type BABEL into the Facebook search field. We look forward to seeing you there.
This is Tim Russ, Lieutenant Commander Tuvok on Star Trek Voyager, and you're listening to Trek FM.
Open your mind to the past. Oh, this may mean something.
I've been coerced into watching tonight's movie.
You do have books in the 24th century.
It's a primitive culture. I'm just trying to blend in.
Some people think the future means the end of history. We haven't run out of history quite yet.
Hello and welcome to episode 100 of Primitive Culture, a Trek FM podcast all about our history, our culture and how Star Trek relates to it. Today I'm joined by two very special guests, Tony Black and Clara Cook. Hi both of you, how are you doing?
Pretty good, I think. It's amazing to be here for episode 100. Wow, what an achievement.
Yeah, it doesn't actually feel like we've had 100 episodes. Although actually, Duncan, you might correct me. You might feel like you've been here quite a long time. So it might feel like 100 to you, but it feels like just yesterday, Primitive Culture was a twinkle in both of your eyes.
Well, I have to say, we're recording in, I don't know, I was going to say lockdown. We're not quite locked down. Some of us might be. Tony, maybe you're in lockdown. Who knows? Basically the 7,956th day of March 2020. So it's impossible to say. We certainly have done a lot of episodes of Primitive Culture. I mean, I should say, for what it's worth, this is not... Well, I think this may be the 100th episode we've recorded, but we are recording slightly out of order, as is often the case with Primitive Culture. I had to find a day that I could get the three of us all together, in a sort of virtual room together. Yeah. So I think episode 99 may not have been recorded yet. On the other hand, I went back and checked, and there are those supplementals. The numbering system changed early on. So a bit in the same way as people argue about, were there 78 or 79 original series episodes? Who knows? I actually don't 100% know whether this is episode 100 Brilliant. Recording. This is going out as episode 100. So, we're about there. We've recorded roughly 100 episodes of this show. Yeah. Which is kind of amazing, because I do remember, back, it must be 4 years ago? Is it, Tony, that you first came to me and said,
Nearly.
Hey, I've got this idea for a little show, do you fancy a little kind of side project? And then when we first started doing it, Clara, you'll know this, because when you came on board, our list of potential episode topics was well established. Within about a week or two, I think we probably had 100 potential episode topics. And there are still, I went back and had a look at it today, there are still quite a lot. So who knows? I don't know if we're going to make it to episode 200, but the material is there. There is material there. There are topics there. So potentially, we could keep on going for a while. Yeah. But it's great to have the two of you back on together. It's very rare that the three of us have ever recorded together. I think there's probably been maybe 2 or 3 times in the past when we've gone to see a film together, or been at Destination Star Trek together, or, actually all been in the same room. But other than that, very rare to get my two illustrious former co-hosts in the same, as I say, in the same Zoom chat together.
Well, I mean, I would say, given we're doing a bit of back patting here, I think credit to you, Duncan, for steering this ship to 100 episodes, because, I mean, I know Clara and I have contributed a fair bit over the last few years, and like you say, that we came together and came up with the idea and things like that. But, as is typical with me, I jumped ship within 10 episodes. You carried on, and then I've been a guest ever since. And to get to 100 for any project is no mean feat, especially when it's not just putting it together like a half hour, casual thing. This involves research. It involves thinking. It does involve a lot of planning, a lot of thought. And I think to do this many really, really quality podcasts about Star Trek. And there is a fan base for it. You know, you frequently see people say how much they really enjoy primitive culture and the discussions. Is a real credit. And so I think you deserve the complete praise for that, for steering this. So well done. It's brilliant.
Oh, thank you, Tony.
What would the equivalent be in Star Trek universe? Like, is Duncan Gene Roddenberry when it comes to this podcast? Or is he another showrunner? Like, who is the longest showrunner of Star Trek ever?
It's probably Rick Berman, isn't it?
Are you Rick Berman then?
I don't know, maybe. Especially since it was originally Tony's idea. Tony came to me, he said, do you want to do a show called, what was it, Historical Treks?
Something like that.
Is what it was going to be called, something like that. And I was like, well, maybe, I don't know, have I got time? You know, because you wanted to do it weekly, I think, originally. And I said, well, I don't think I can manage that. Maybe I can do fortnightly. Since lockdown, I aim to get 2 episodes out a month, but the pretense that this is a fortnightly show has kind of gone out the window. But yeah, you know, since then it has become a big part of my life and a big big commitment one way or another. But it has been great. I mean, I was looking back over some of our previous episodes today, and we have definitely covered a lot of topics. I love the breadth that this show gives us to look at very different things. And for me, a lot of it is about learning about those things. I mean, I've learned about so much just from doing this show, from researching the topics, month on month, that I would never have known about, about Star Trek, but also just about the wider world, about history, about literature, about culture. And also had some fantastic guests on with, bringing their own expertise, whether that's in the realm of film studies or design or baseball. It was one of the first episodes I think I had guests on I had, Zach and Mike, from Trek FM to try and explain to me the rules of baseball so we could take me out to the holosuite together. So it's been a great learning experience for me. It's been a great experience and great to share it, with the two of you as well. Cause although, nowadays you come back to the show as guests, you do come back semi-regularly, and you both absolutely made your mark and your stamp on the show and the kind of topics that we can do. I think Tony, obviously early on, particularly with some of the kind of historical topics, there were some topics that Tony, you were sort of always pushing me to do, and I was always a little bit scared about. Like, so we did our Cold War topic, but it took us about 3 years to get there.
We got there though in the end. We did it.
We got there in the end. I know these like big topics. I was like, I don't know. I think I need a bit longer to research that one. Clara, I think you also helped me to see that really this remit, which Tony came up with, our history, our culture, and how Star Trek relates to it, could be a lot broader than I'd been interpreting it. And it could encompass social issues, kind of broader societal, cultural phenomena. And that, I think, made a big difference as well to the kind of topics that we could do, rather than being a strictly historical show or a strictly kind of film related show or whatever, that we could kind of broaden it out into, and sometimes quite wacky topics. I mean, there have been a few, I think both of you have brought at one time or other topics where I really didn't understand what it was we were supposed to be talking about, but we kind of, we muddled through and we got there in the end. Yeah,
I think one of the topics I think was really weird was Star Trek, if it had been made by another culture other than America. And you were like, what, you mean like French Star Trek or Japanese Star Trek? Like when we started analysing sci-fi in different cultures and different parts of the world, you're like, what about, but actually it was okay. I think the one that's probably, well, they've all taught me something, I think, but the one that's taught me the most about a subject I had no idea about was the one that we did on past tense and the prison uprising in upstate New York, in Attica. And so I read that whole book about the prison uprising, which I don't know if I would have necessarily found or come across if I hadn't been researching it for this podcast. And that was a real eye opener because I had no knowledge of that particular incident, or I wouldn't say I had no knowledge of the US prison system, but I would say a middling knowledge, like a sort of basic knowledge, not enough really. And through that particular podcast episode, I learned a lot through reading that book and doing research.
Absolutely. And that was an interesting one as well, because I think sometimes we do topics where the influence, the kind of real world influence, is kind of to some degree obvious. So for example, Amy Nelson and I recently did an episode on the Drumhead, looking at McCarthyism and the Red Scare and that kind of thing. I think most people watching that episode probably get that that's the background to that story. But the Attica background to past tense was something that I had no idea. I wasn't familiar with this story at all. shamefully in a way, because it's a terrible and really shocking and kind of important story. But certainly on this side of the pond, I don't think is one that people are very familiar with. And I had always thought, I mean, most people, when they talk about past tense, they talk about it in terms of homelessness. And that was obviously one big influence on the writers. And they said, they were sort of noticing homeless people around Los Angeles while they were kind of coming up with that story. But it was the fact that there in the DS9 companion, there was this one line, I think, just from Ira Stephen Bear saying, we were trying to work out how to do this story. And then I thought, this is a story about Attica. And I think I probably said to you, Clara, oh, this is interesting. We should go and, look this up. We're going to go and research this one. And we did. And, as you say, learnt about this very shocking story that I think also, I imagine most of our listeners probably, I mean, maybe those in the US would know a bit more about that prison uprising. They might have heard of it, but I don't think many people had necessarily made the link to the Star Trek episode. I mean, unless, obviously everyone's got well, not everyone, most of us probably have a copy of the DS9 companion, but it's not a book that you read cover to cover. That sort of thing you might well have passed you by. So yeah, it is a great pleasure, I think, digging out some of those more obscure influences, the less obvious ones, as well as doing the kind of more well-trodden, well, I was going to say nautical literature. Tony, you and I discussed that at Destination Star Trek. We've never really done a proper episode on something like that, but the kind of the big things that NASA, for example, Clara, you and I did an episode on NASA, these kind of quite obvious influences. Then there are the kind of little ones, sometimes quite obscure movies that were inspiring episodes that you might not even realize were kind of borrowed or riffing on something. And that's always a pleasure to dig into those and kind of work out, oh, I see. Okay. Now I get where this is coming from. Now I sort of have a different, sometimes better, sometimes slightly worse appreciation of the Star Trek episode, but definitely a different appreciation of it.
I think you and I reached our peak when we did an episode about Brigadoon and and we had to watch Meridian.
Tony, I think you mean Brigadoon.
Hey, Brigadoon. I mean, yeah, that was. If I never watch Meridian again, it won't be too soon. I tell you though, I think as you guys were talking then, I tell you an episode I think really knocked my socks off. It's not a TV one, but the one you guys both did on the pandemic and critical care a few months ago. I thought that was fantastic. As a listener, I felt like I learned so much, and it was a great conversation about, not just what we were going through at that point. You can't get more of a timely kind of podcast, I think, than that, because we were right in the middle of the lockdown and the intensity of it. And, for posterity, we're sort of recording now as a second semi-weird, maybe sort of lockdown here and there is sort of happening in the second wave and all this. But back then it was in the summer. It was really interesting to listen to that. So I think, I think there are episodes that if you, as well as the TV or the fun ones or the light-hearted ones, there's some fantastic conversations that I don't really think you get in many other places, to be honest.
Yeah, I don't think there's another sort of television franchise that you could do this with either. Like, I'm not sure you could do a podcast like this where you look at all these different influences, like historical, sociological, psychology, history, but also like literature as well. We've done quite a lot of episodes on literature. Like, this is the podcast that kind of forced me to read Gilgamesh and Beowulf. I mean, forced me to reread Beowulf and then watch the Doctor enact Beowulf, which was painful, but forced me to read Gilgamesh, which I'm probably sure I might never have got around to, which would be shameful. But I don't know if there's any other TV series that you could do that with. I just don't think, I mean, most other TV franchises have some sort of common theme, or, I mean, I guess you could do it a little bit with the X-Files, but even the X-Files, it has this common overarching storyline, whereas, as we know with Star Trek, it's different almost with every particular evolution of it, Now we have Discovery, which is a completely different new type of Star Trek, and even something like Lower Decks, is a completely different type of Star Trek. That was interesting, because one of the things that you wanted us to watch for this episode was These Are the Voyagers, the last episode of the series.
I'm sorry, guys. Apologise for putting that on the list.
I don't mind it so much. A lot of people hate it, but I actually thought the script was quite interesting, and I thought there was one line. Bear in mind, I haven't seen it in years, so it was actually not too bad watching it again. But there's one line in it where Trip says, or maybe it's Malcolm, who basically whines throughout the entire episode. But Malcolm says something like, it won't be the same about the Enterprise. There'll be another Enterprise. And he's like, but it won't be the same. And Trip's like, but that's okay. It won't be the same. Yeah. And I sort of felt like that line was a perfect line for Star Trek today, because it's all Star Trek. It's just different Star Trek. So I think you have years left of Primitive Culture to analyse everything else that's coming up.
It's true.
Well, who knows? Will we get to, I mean, we've been doing this I think it's about 4 years, something like that now. Really? I don't know, somewhere between 3 and 4 years. Will we get to, season 7? I don't know. No promises, but, we'll keep on going for a little while anyway, for sure. Well, with that in mind, I thought there was a few episodes that we could kind of maybe touch on, and I'd be interested just to hear your sort of thoughts on these. First of all, I thought we'd look at the 3 series that have been fortunate enough to get to 100 episodes. And there's only 3. It's only Next Gen, DS9 and Voyager that actually hit that mark. Now, I'm not really convinced that any of them exactly celebrated with a particularly special episode. Possibly Voyager, it feels like, is the one that's the closest to doing something special with that point. But I was quite struck. All 3 of them, I think, managed to put out absolute bangers of an episode for their 100th episode. So the 3 I've got in mind are Redemption, Part 1 for Next Generation, The Ship for DS9, and Timeless for Voyager. And it just struck me in some ways, all 3 of those episodes embody really a lot of what is absolutely central and brilliant about those respective shows. And I don't know if that's just a coincidence or if someone had an eye on, the fact that this was episode 100 coming up. I'm sure they had a party and a cake and all that sort of thing. But I just think it's quite interesting that those are 3, if you wanted to introduce people to those 3 series, those would be, some pretty great episodes to show them.
It's funny though, because Redemption, is it Redemption Part 1 or Part 2 that's not episode number?
It's Part 1, I think, is the 100th, yeah. Although again, it probably depends if you count, Encounter at Farpoint as 1 or 2. And you'd probably need Larry Nemeczek here he had some whole system in his Next Gen companion, didn't he, for like numbering them and so on. Yeah. But I think it's Part 1 is the one that's generally considered to be the 100th episode, yeah.
Well, I mean, that one could in some sense be coincidental, given it ties in with a season finale, and they always back then, and particularly back then, they'd throw the kitchen sink, wouldn't they, at a season finale, back in the days of this kind of storytelling and the way they used to produce shows. So did they go into that thinking this is the 100th, we need to celebrate it with, the Klingons, with Civil War, with, the return of Denise Crosby and Seela and, all these. So it's like, it does make you wonder. I don't know. It feels like it might have been a little bit of a happy accident with that one. It just, as you say, it just turns out that it's a really impressive piece of TV that touches on all the best bits about TNG, that measure of diplomacy, adventure, exploration, just all that. It's sort of got all of that sort of mixed in its own little way. So yeah, whereas the other, particularly Voyager, like you say, that's the one that really feels like it's trying to celebrate something. Whereas, and maybe the ship's a funny one in that sense, isn't it? Because it's not necessarily a celebratory, here we are kind of episode. It's just a really, really cracking piece of drama. So I suppose they all come at this from different approaches, don't they? And maybe it's more intentional in others than some. I don't know.
I absolutely love The Ship. It's the perfect Deep Space Nine episode. It's dark. It's bleak. It's a kind of downer. It's doing really high emotional stakes. It's doing this drama really, really well. But I also think it plays a really key role in the series because I think it kind of prefigures the whole Dominion War arc and the whole, everything that DS9 is going to do going forward, from the end, because this is early 5th season, for the sort of latter part of that series is in that episode somehow. It's almost like a perfect microcosm of how this story is going to play out. It's going to be kind of tragic. It's going to be kind of bleak. There are going to be shades of grey. There are going to be regrets. There are going to be people doing things that maybe they shouldn't have done. There's going to be losses. I don't know. It feels almost like if you wanted to sort of stake a claim to like, okay, this is what this show is going to be going forward, or this is what this show can do. That is a brilliant episode to show that. So again, I mean, I think it's probably coincidental that was the 100th episode, but for me, it's the perfect Deep Space Nine episode because it has all of that in spades. And then Voyager, obviously, you're right, literally opens with them swigging champagne, confetti. It's kind of a little bit more obvious there. There's something kind of special going on. But again, it's the perfect Voyager episode. It's high concept science fiction. That's what, for all its faults, and certainly Tony, I know you have some issues with Voyager. I have a few issues with Voyager, but the thing they really did well, I think, was these kind of high concept sci-fi episodes, and Timeless is an absolutely brilliant example of that.
I think all 3 episodes also showcase the captain. So the redemption really showcases Picard's involvement with the Klingon Empire, but also his diplomacy skills and his sort of, I think I would say, his confidence in his decisions and his kind of liaising with his crew. And then the DS9 episode, The Ship, really showcases Sisko's ability to fight under pressure and make hard choices. And that he's going to just have to continue to make more and more hard choices as, the situation gets worse and worse with the Dominion. And then the third one is slightly different, I know, because most of it, Janeway is not really in it as much as Chakotay and Kim, but it also shows her really excited about science. I mean, she's more excited about an engine than almost anyone I've ever seen, and I know it's the engine that's going to get them home, but it's also that she's a science geek, and she's really into sort of technology and engineering. So part of that, I think, is showcasing the 3 captains and their different respective personalities, which is quite important.
Yeah, Timeless, I think, actually, if more episodes of Voyager had been along the quality level of Timeless, I think it would have been just a far better show. I think that's a really great episode of Star Trek, and one of the best Voyager episodes for me. Not just because it's quite special and it's just, they're just throwing everything at it and, they're destroying the ship and it's crashing on a planet and all this kind of thing. And the, time travel and all that. But it's, and Geordie's in that as well, isn't he? He just crops up and this kind of thing. I think it's a great example of, as you say, this high concept celebration of having reached a milestone, of having got to a point where they've completed it. And maybe I wonder if they maybe didn't take it as much for granted with Voyager, by that point. I don't know. I mean, I think with TNG, they just, it was riding high in the ratings. They knew they were going to go for seasons by that point. DS9, I know it wasn't quite as super popular ratings-wise, but I think they just assumed by that point, that was at Star Trek at its peak, wasn't it, on television? So you got Voyager still on as well and all this kind of thing. Maybe, I don't know, by the time Voyager's coming along, maybe they felt like it was a bit more of something they should celebrate, doing this many episodes, getting to this point. And especially, it means more in the sense that Enterprise wasn't able to reach that milestone in the end, And had they done that, would they have done something special as well? I imagine they probably would, and they would probably found a way to do it.
They got so close. They got to 98 or something on Enterprise.
Oh yeah, they did, didn't they? Yeah.
That's really cruel.
It is. It is. They could have, they should have given 2 more episodes.
They should do a comeback.
Well, there you go.
Yeah, they should. Yeah,
give
them a short trek or 2, and they can, It's like ABBA. Didn't ABBA famously recorded 97 songs or something? And then, recently they were saying, we really should get together and do another 3. So got the century basically.
To finish it off.
There you go. Yeah. Bring back Enterprise for a little mini-series.
Yeah, definitely. Absolutely. I just think by then they'd reached a point where they felt like it was a celebratory thing. And maybe earlier on they just didn't think they needed to sort of do that, or maybe they did. It's hard to say, really.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, you said with Next Gen, maybe Redemption slightly passed that by because it was a season finale and everything as well, and they were kind of riding high. An episode that they did apparently celebrate was the episode Legacy, which was the 80th episode of Next Gen, and the reason for that was that famously the original series had gone to 79 episodes, and that was the point where the show had surpassed whatever the expression is, when the child outdoes the parent or whatever, I mean, this spin-off that basically, famously Patrick Stewart didn't unpack his bag because they thought it was just about stringing, a season or 2 out so that they could do this syndication package with the original series, actually reached this point where it was more successful than the original series, at least in terms of the number of episodes. And I think you're right, by that point, or maybe, I don't know, probably by that point, even by the point of Legacy, was critically acclaimed, incredibly popular, was lightning had struck twice. It was this kind of unbelievable success story. And certainly that's an episode where apparently at the end of filming, they had a big party and a cake and all this sort of thing to kind of celebrate the fact that they'd reached this milestone. appropriately with this episode called Legacy in a way, which is not, I wouldn't say, it's a good episode, I guess. It's a perfectly decent episode. It's not a particularly special episode, but obviously for them, there was this kind of, it was symbolic. It was a bit like, I suppose, I was saying like the child out surpassing the parent. The darker side of that is the children who become obsessed with mortality when they reach the age that their, parents died. So my mum has a friend, for example, who, his father died of a heart attack at the age of, 65 or whatever. And when he was kind of 64, he was getting in a complete state about this. And then once he got to 66 or whatever, he was like, "Oh, that's fine. It's great.
I'm going to live forever.
Is sunny, basically." Exactly. I'm immortal. Effectively, I'm basically immortal. Yeah, this sort of sense of like you thought there was a kind of this dark legacy. You thought there was a kind of cutoff point, and somehow you've gone beyond that.
Yeah, maybe. It's interesting though that did they plan it that it would be an episode called Legacy? Was that again just a happy accident? I feel like some of these things with Trek are just in the end happy accidents. But even that episode, he's, and like you say, it's decent. It's not bad. It's a fairly, middle of the road episode, but that in itself is sort of looking back, isn't it? It's the whole, invoking, it's about Tasha Yar in some senses, it's the ghost of Tasha Yar haunting that episode. So there's just something strange in that turned out to be the one that filled that slot. I have to say, watching it, I hadn't watched this one in years. Did you guys pick up on what I would call a Riker maneuver? Not the Riker maneuver, because it's not the Riker maneuver, but a Riker maneuver. When later in the episode, towards the final act, when they're sort of storming the base, they're creeping through the corridors, and there's a guy, like a guard or whatever, ahead, and Riker jumps out and shoots his phaser. But did you see what he did to do that? He sort of does this with his arm. He goes like that, and I've just sort of flung my arm to the right.
Sort of, right.
Honestly,
fencing style almost.
Oh, it is amazing. I would encourage anyone to go and look at that Riker maneuver. I've never seen a phaser fired quite that expressively before. It's amazing.
I sort of feel like flinging your arm out like that might give an indication to the person that you're going to shoot. I feel like it's a bit like, like I'm going to shoot. Oh, and now I've shot.
It was,
I mean,
yeah, exactly. It was extremely theatrical, I have to say, right? And all the better for it. The director, I think, just must have said to Jonathan Frakes, "Just have fun with this, like, just jump out." Yeah, it's amazing. So that made the episode for me.
I'm going to have to go back and watch this episode again. I missed that on this recent rewatch the other day. I'm going to have to go back and watch it again.
Check it out.
But it is, as I say, sort of, I would say, perfectly decent Next Gen episode. It's got some nice moments in it. But you're right, probably not intentionally written, at least, as a kind of celebratory episode. Unlike the next two episodes I thought we could look at. And I feel bad because I feel these episodes do sort of beg to be compared with each other, and it's a very unfair comparison. But these are the 30th anniversary episodes from Voyager, Flashback, and from DS9, Trials and Tribulations. Now, I remember, this was around the time that I was massively into Star Trek growing up. The 30th anniversary was a big deal. These two episodes were a big deal. This was absolutely thrilling that both these shows were going to be marking the occasion with these very special episodes. It has to be said, I think, personally, only one of these is a special episode, and the other one is really someone who didn't quite know what it was they were meant to be celebrating. Yeah, exactly. It's a flash. They call it flashback. I timed it. The actual flashback doesn't start for 17 minutes in this, 44-minute episode. I mean, it's a very, very weird one, that one, I think. Yeah. And then when it does, half of it is rehashing scenes from The Undiscovered Country. Okay, I get that. Obviously, Trials and Tribulations rehashes a lot of scenes from The Trouble with Tribbles, with more kind of technical wizardry and so on. But some of these scenes from The Undiscovered Country, if you've seen the film, it's kind of assumed you've seen the film, right? But if you've seen the film recently, the film is very slickly directed. It benefits from, for the actors as well. The shooting schedule on a film obviously is much slower. You do less per day, you do fewer pages per day or whatever, a lot more attention paid to the quality of it. And for large parts of this episode, they're basically recreating scenes from that film, but shot in kind of 4:3 on a television budget, on a television timescale. And therefore they're basically, it almost feels like a fan film somehow, because it doesn't quite, it's not very good. Like the undiscovered country scenes are not as good as they were in the undiscovered country because they can't reuse the actual scenes that they shot then. And it almost sort of draws attention to the fact that it's this weird kind of facsimile. It's a very strange one, I think.
I also think that the characters in it don't act like the characters did in the undiscovered country.
Yeah.
Like Janice Rand is really bitchy.
She's awful as well. She's a terrible
I'm like, Janice,
I don't know what is going on there.
I completely forgot this episode until I watched it for this podcast, and I was like, Janice, Jesus. And I also think Sulu. Oh my God, not George. Okay, Sulu.
Oh my.
The same man, they're the same person. I also think Sulu. Let me get this right.
Oh my.
I think Sulu was like snide and kind of like sort of like abrupt, and I understand he's a captain and it's serious business running a starship, but like he didn't appear like that in the movie. He appeared much more smooth and confident and kind of like charming. And some of the stuff that they said to Tuvok, I guess because it's Tuvok's memories, isn't it? So that's why the characters are acting a certain way, because it's Tuvok hated Starfleet.
That's a very generous interpretation, Clara, I think.
I feel like they got the characters wrong, which just is really odd. Plus also the memory mixing and the two brain patterns of Janeway and Tuvok combining, and then this weird virus that's like mimicking a little girl falling off a cliff. I mean, it's just no.
It's a bizarre story. It doesn't really, it does make sense by the end, but like I've seen this episode a few times, and I even didn't watch it all that long ago. I can never remember what the resolution of it is because it's so random. So you think it's all about this flashback and going back to this time. Actually, the only significance of this flashback period is that a guy happened to die who happened to have this thing in his brain, and he happened to give it to Tuvok. And it seems that being, in the Delta Quadrant, whatever it is, 50, 100 years later, this thing has kind of reactivated. You don't find that out till like the last 5 minutes. It's an absolute mess of an episode, I think. And I do think part of it, you were saying Clara, they don't act like they did in the film, or the characters. I think partly they don't act like they did in the film because the film was really well written and really tight and really kind of economical. And the other reason it feels kind of like fanfic to me is there's a whole long scene where Sulu explains to Tuvok why he's going to go and help Kirk. And he explains about loyalty and this crew that he served with. We got all of that. We watched the film. No one questioned the fact that Sulu was going to come and help Kirk. Even if we know how much George Takei and William Shatner don't get on, we kind of have to accept that Sulu and Kirk are still friends. We don't need that. It's like totally extraneous. It's like filling in the gaps. It's sort of stating the obvious. But there's also maybe an element where, if you're saying, Clara, they feel like they're not quite the right characters, maybe this is fanfic written by someone who is not actually a fan of the thing that they're fanficking. Do you know what I mean? And I think that's the issue for Brannon Braga, is he wasn't that keen on the original series. He never watched the original series. Unlike with DS9, where you've got these guys who absolutely adored TOS and relished the opportunity to go back and kind of play in that sandbox. For Voyager, it's this weird thing where it's almost like a sort of contractual obligation. And also, I think choosing that film, I can see it sort of makes sense on some level. I think, Tony, you and I might have talked about at one point, was there a link to the fact that Tim Russ was in Generations, and there was this kind of weird sense that therefore Tim Russ belongs in the Star Trek cinematic universe, even though it was a different character in Generations and so on. But they'd seen him in that uniform before, so there was this kind of idea that he could kind of fit in that environment. But it's also a weird one because at the point, of the 30th anniversary, when this episode came out, that film's only 5 years old. There's not that much nostalgia for a film that's only 5 years old. I mean, I just about missed seeing it at the cinema. Do you know what I mean? Like, it was a fairly recent thing. So I'm not quite sure. It doesn't really, for me, capture that sense of the magic of kind of going back in time, the magic of engaging with this long storied history of Star Trek in the way that obviously DS9 manages to do, with the massive nostalgia value of going back, to the 1960s, actually going back to the early 90s when it's like 1996 or whatever it is, somehow doesn't have quite the same appeal.
No, it's weird. Maybe it's that they thought they were doing one episode that was going right back to the 60s, so they had to do another episode that was in the more recent flashback sort of Trek canon. But then, why not instead try and do something about one of the mid-80s kind of Star Trek movies if you really wanted to do that kind of thing? Why not tie in what would have become Future's End into the Voyage Home? Because they're essentially the same kind of story in many ways. Why not try and mix that up? I don't know. It's like, I think the difference is with Trials and Tribulations, and this goes back, I think, Duncan, to you saying about them being fans, and that kind of thing. They Trials and Tribulations added something to the Trouble with Tribbles. It actually managed to craft a story around that first episode without you needing to see Trials and Tribulations. You don't have to watch Trouble with Tribbles and then watch Trials and Tribulations. But when you do watch that DS9 episode, it adds something. It manages to take things going on in the DS9 universe, and it's also reverential in that the characters are fans themselves. The characters are actually fans of Kirk and Spock. It is like those guys geeking out, which is really great, and you can identify with that as viewers. Whereas the Voyager one just feels like they're trying to wedge a plot into a popular Star Trek movie, like you say, due to like a tenuous, maybe Tim Russ kind of link-ish. And I think that what you talked about, I think I got confused when we talked about this, and I thought Tim Russ was in The Undiscovered Country. And I think I said to you, oh yeah, Tuvok was in that. And you're like, no, actually, no, he wasn't. So I think that's where that sort of, Mandela effect sort of creeps in, and that you don't quite know like what the reality is. And I just feel like that's what it was. It was, Flashback just felt forced in a way that Trials and Tribulations felt like a real tribute and a real, love letter and a celebration. And it's maybe it just feels like they could have done so many other possible things with Voyager, and they had to just wedge it in, and it was too difficult to make work.
Yes, it felt like the two parts, like there was a struggle to kind of blend the two parts, whereas Trials and Tribulations, you're right, fits perfectly into that original story. And that is quite a difficult thing to do, I think. I actually just finished watching this new Jurassic Park cartoon, partly because I was kind of curious about thinking about Star Trek Prodigy and what a Star Trek show aimed at kids might be like, and whether that's something that those of us who are not kids but love Star Trek are going to get anything out of. So I thought I'd watch this show, Camp Cretaceous, which was the show that famously Steven Spielberg apparently said he would allow them to do it, but they had to make it scary. They weren't allowed to pull any punches. The dinosaurs had to be terrifying, even if they were animated. And Camp Cretaceous basically takes place simultaneously with the first Jurassic World movie in the same place, but with a different group of characters, and it kind of intersects with that movie. And I have to say, I mean, it's a bit ropey to begin with, but I'd say it gets better and better. I felt by the end of it, it was kind of a better story than Jurassic World, ultimately. Do you know what I mean? Like, I'm not saying it was a better piece of entertainment, because obviously the movie has like all the kind of whiz-bang special effects and so on. But just as a story in exactly that time frame, I thought it worked really well. And equally, I would argue Trials and Tribulations is actually a better episode of Star Trek than The Trouble with Tribbles. I think the comedy is better. I mean, I like Trouble with Tribbles. I think it's a great episode. It's very charming. Maybe it's partly that some of it feels a little bit dated. I don't know. Some of the comedy to me feels a little bit forced, whereas Trials and Tribulations, I think, is just sublime. It's, every joke lands perfectly. Every member of the cast is brilliant. I mean, Avery Brooks, for example, who we think of as quite a kind of serious heavyweight actor and quite kind of, kind of dramatic heavy hitter, is brilliant at the comedy in this episode. Just this very kind of light touch to Sisko, but this kind of slightly cheeky, slightly embarrassed, slightly kind of, almost sort of slightly awkward, with the way he plays it with the Department of Temporal Investigations. We also, of course, get an X-Files reference in this episode for you two. I just think it's absolutely, it's a remarkable piece of work, both technically and, just creatively, really.
I think that one of the things that's good about it is it makes time travel funny. And a lot of the time travel episodes or the time travel movies, I mean, I wouldn't include The Voyage Home in this because there is a lot of humour in The Voyage Home, but a lot of the time travel stories in Star Trek are not funny. They are serious, or they are the crew trying to solve a problem that has potential effects that are far-reaching and really damaging. And I know they're looking for a bomb in a tribble, but you can't help but find it humorous when you see them scanning with tricorders, old school tricorders, every single tribble, you know, and then throwing them over their shoulders when they can't find the bomb. I just think, like, and then the idea that, like, Dax and Sisko are in the hatch above Kirk, and that the tribbles that are actually hitting William Shatner, I know they're not, but hitting William Shatner on the head could be the tribbles that they're tossing out the hatch. I just think, like, there's just so many details in it that are hilarious. I just think that, I mean, every line, every joke, like you said, lands perfectly. I think one of the things that really freaked me out about these 2 episodes, though, was I can't keep straight in my head, like, how long people live in the Star Trek universe. The idea that Tuvok is really ancient. And then the idea that this Klingon spy in Trial and Tribulations basically only looks about 10 to 15 years older when he's like 150. Yeah. And the idea that Dax is basically pretty much had a love affair or had some sort of romantic liaison with every famous man in Star Trek because Dax has had so many lives. Yeah. I was like, this is mind-blowing. I can't handle like how all these people have lived through Star Trek history. But yeah, I think it's a brilliant episode. It just, I mean, it makes me laugh out loud every single time.
Yeah.
I think Dax in some ways is the key to that episode though, because although you've got the kind of fanboy thing with Sisko getting the autograph at the end, you've got kind of everyone, trying to catch sight of Kirk and this kind of mystique of Kirk, which all feels so much more natural in that episode as well than it does in Voyager, where you kind of have Janeway giving a speech about, what rogues they were. And, wouldn't it be fun to kind of, ride along with them? But Dax is the one who absolutely, because as she says, she lived through that time. She has genuine nostalgia for it. She has, and she can really capture that sense of, obviously as viewers, we have this kind of nostalgia for Star Trek, particularly, I mean, none of us, we're all kind of whatever sort of not second generation exactly, but kind of later generation Star Trek fans, if you know what I mean. For those who watched it back in the 60s, that episode must have been even more amazing and kind of mind blowing in various ways. But you can kind of understand it also because they draw attention to the fashions and so on, almost as this sense, because the way she puts it, it's not, she wasn't serving on the Enterprise. It's not that she was kind of into Star Trek in that sense. It's that she has this attachment to that era and the clothes and the kind of, the sensibilities of that era. And we can sort of relate to that in a way as that kind of more ordinary nostalgia, if you know what I mean, as in like, we might have nostalgia for the 90s and 90s music and 90s fashions and all these sorts of things, because that's kind of when we were growing up. And for Dax, there's this real sense, it feels like she's kind of saying, wow, the 60s were like the best time. Everyone had so much fun. It was great. As you say, Clara, she, seemed to be getting entangled with various, young Dr. McCoy and, etc. There's this kind of sense of like, this was truly a golden era, in a way, not just for Star Trek, but for kind of in universe, sort of Federation history. This was a great time.
It's funny though, because you think of the kind of Star Trek we're getting these days, and almost all of it feels like this kind of episode. There's so many now callbacks or references or links to the older 60s and 90s now eras of Star Trek. It almost feels like it's diluting the fun of these kind of things. Getting something like Trials and Tribulations was just wow, this is great. This is just, and I don't know if that's going to feel quite the same anymore, because they're building entire shows around this kind of nostalgia, and these kinds. So, will you even get a Milestone episode in quite the same way? I feel like the only show now that might be able to do that is something like Lower Decks, that actually is all about sort of recapturing those kind of old eras, but it is also doing its own thing. It is also trying to be its own little thing at the same time, I think. So I just wonder if the kind of Milestone celebratory episode is going to be harder to do in the future, because Star Trek is very much, right now at least, and it all depends on where everything goes, but right now it is sort of living in the past, in a way that the 90s shows weren't. The 90s shows were their own thing, and they did have lots of, don't get me wrong, they did have lots of references, and they had characters pop up, in all the different shows at various points, but it wasn't about that. It was different. So it's just interesting. Are we post the Milestone celebratory episode now? I don't know. It's a shame if we are, because these kind of episodes in all these different ways were really special.
And what would it be if we got it? Because, I mean, they must be heading towards, I guess, episode 800 maybe. Are they going to get to 1,000? That's going to take a long time with the shorter seasons they do now.
It's true.
We had the 50th anniversary. I mean, we can talk about that in a minute maybe, but, Star Trek was not on TV then, sadly, so there was a limit to how much they could do to mark. We didn't get the next version of, what we got for the 30th. And equally, the 40th, I guess, passed by, for the same reason, because Enterprise had just been cancelled, I guess then. That was not a time that anyone was going to be celebrating anything much. What will the next kind of landmark be? But you're right. I suppose, at the moment we're getting, next gen landmarks, Voyager landmarks, it was DS9 landmarks. We were all there for the anniversary of DS9 and the documentary coming out and so on. But those are being marked by the Picard series. But Janeway's getting her own, okay, it's not a Janeway series exactly, but she's getting her own comeback series, basically. They are bringing these characters back. But I suppose rather than trying to, other than with Lower Decks, which is sort of in the world of Next Gen and is kind of doing that nostalgia thing, it's much more about bringing these characters forward into our own bleak, miserable, wretched, grown-up world.
Hellscape,
which is very, unnostalgic,
But I think one of the downfalls of this, the new stuff that they're doing, which is something that Trials and Tribulations balanced really well, but was not balanced so well, and these are the Voyagers, the Enterprise finale, is that there's a danger in exploring the backstories of every single character. I think that's one of the things that they did with Discovery, and I really, really like the portrayal of Pike. I think he's portrayed very well. I like the actor. I like the portrayal of Pike. I admit that we probably haven't got that much information on Pike, so we could probably explore his backstory, and I'm always up for more Spock. But I must admit it's a real fangirl thing of wanting to see more Spock. I'm not sure it's necessarily the most creatively wise decision. And the reason why I say that is because, and it's the same thing with these other Voyages, like, you have Riker as a chef talking to all the characters about their, feelings and thoughts. And it's just exploring the backstory of every single character. Like you were saying, Tony, it does kind of become a bit samey after a while, and it takes some of the specialness away from it. And in Trials and Tribulations, they went onto the Enterprise, they're on the Enterprise, and you saw Kirk and Spock, you saw Scotty and McCoy, but the characters didn't walk up to them and ask them about how they feel to live on the Enterprise, or how they feel about Tribbles. Yeah. Whereas now, if they were making that now, would they have an episode of Discovery like that where Burnham, goes on to, I don't know, Archer's ship and, quietly does something without talking directly to Archer? They wouldn't have that. No. Archer would have to meet Burnham. They'd have to discuss it at length. Like, it's basically, very much now is like, we're going to show you everything. We're not going to leave anything to mystery, and in a way, I think that's kind of one of the problems with the Voyager episode with Sulu, is that they had Sulu acknowledge Janeway, and kind of the characters from the past were too involved with the characters from the present. And really, when you're watching Voyager, it should be the Voyager crew that you're paying attention to. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. And
that's kind of the problem with Discovery, is we weren't paying attention to Discovery crew. We're paying attention to the Enterprise crew.
Yeah.
And that means the Discovery crew's storylines suffer. And I think that's one of the ways in which the DS9 episode got it right. But maybe some of these anniversary episodes, or some of the future Star Trek that's coming out, is kind of getting it slightly, I wouldn't say getting it wrong, because everybody, likes what they like, and there's no harm in that. But maybe it's creatively stifling, like, the franchise a bit.
Well, I think you're right that Trials and Tribulations, it plays to the strengths of the DS9 cast. You've got great comedy from all of them in their various ways. You've got this stuff with Bashir and O'Brien that's very funny and kind of charming and a bit silly. You've got the stuff with Sisko that's quite sort of sweet. You've got Dax, that they've all sort of got something to contribute, and it's a good episode for all of them. Even Odo and Worf sort of get a little moment. I think you're right. Flashback, it's not a great Janeway episode. It's not a great Tuvok episode. Even Tuvok doesn't actually do all that much. if it was a really fantastic episode of the Star Trek Excelsior series that we never got, maybe that would be okay. Maybe we'd kind of accept that the Voyager crew are sort of just a bridge to showing Sulu and everything. But that part of it kind of fails slightly as well. I think there's sort of this sense that Deep Space Nine manages to celebrate both Deep Space Nine itself, its own show, and the original series show. Voyager doesn't quite manage that, and I think These Are the Voyagers fails spectacularly in that respect because it's a terrible episode of Star Trek Enterprise, and it's a terrible episode of The Next Generation as well. It doesn't make sense in terms of The Next Generation. It doesn't fit within that episode very well. It's totally bloated and unnecessary as this kind of subplot that we never saw. If Trials and Tribulations is the kind of, like you say, Clara, is the sort of what's just off screen in The Trouble with Tribbles, what's above the hatch, what's kind of round the corner, etc., but tells an interesting story in its own right. The next gen stuff in These Are the Voyagers feels completely random. It's not helped by the fact that, particularly Jonathan Frakes just cannot play that age. He cannot convincingly look like he's 10 years younger or whatever he's supposed to be, and they can't really square that. So it looks very fake. The next gen stuff looks fake, partly just because his face looks fake. Sorry if that sounds kind of harsh, but that's the fact of the matter. They should have thought about that. It's true. At least they had Data in voiceover, so you buy that. You're like, oh yeah, that's Data. That feels like Data from Next Gen. That's because we don't have to see his face. But it also just spectacularly fails to serve Enterprise, to the extent that this was the episode where, apparently Scott Bakula, the nicest man in the world, stormed into Brannon Braga's office and said, what the expletive is this? Basically, you really want us to film that this is our final episode? Are you serious? Because it's a terrible episode for them. And the Enterprise characters do kind of weird, random things. Often there are scenes where they just feel quite sort of badly acted to me. They feel quite sort of stilted. And I don't know if it's because you've got kind of Riker there watching them or what it is that's going on, but it just feels very odd. There's a really kind of uncanny sense of it. They can't decide, this is supposed to be, 6 years in the future or something. They can't decide whether everyone is supposed to be exactly the same, as if it's the next, as if 6 years makes no difference other than they've got the patches on their uniforms. Jeffrey Combs is the only one who seems like he's playing his character slightly differently. And even there, it's a little bit unclear how different it is. There's no attempt to kind of age them up or to kind of make anything of this passage of time. I have to say, I in my notes, I made notes on all these episodes, and I've only got one word for These Are the Voyagers, which is because that is every time I've seen that episode. And I know Clara, you were saying you thought it wasn't so bad this time around. I mean, I've yet to have an experience of watching that episode where I had that response of, oh, this isn't as bad as I expected. It's always worse than I remember. Because as much as there are moments in it that are nice, it just is so frustrating. It's just such a frustrating episode. Yeah. And people always say, oh, if it had been just a random season 4 episode, it would have been okay. I don't think that's true. I think it would have been like a 2-star random episode. But the fact that it's trying to be a finale as well is just, it's embarrassing, really.
I think one of the main problems is it's got the Downton Abbey effect. So I apologise to anyone who's listening to this who's a big fan of Downton Abbey, but I think Downton Abbey is some of the worst television ever written and made. All right? So just going to lay that out there right now. The first season of Downton Abbey, Lord Grantham, right? No offence to Hugh Bonneville, because I don't think it's his fault, but Lord Grantham says something about the First World War. He's standing there, war has just been declared, and he turns and he sort of looks at everyone standing there with him and says, things are never going to be the same. And we just know people didn't think that at the start of World War I. We know they didn't think it. They all thought it'd be over like Christmas, like supposedly the pandemic would be, right? We all it's only going to be a few months, right? But we know they didn't think that. And there's like lines in These Are the Voyagers where like Trip says something like, well, I thought, I was going to last. Or like he can foresee his own death, just things that people wouldn't say, but it's like, I've got some sort of foreknowledge of something's happening on the horizon. And I'm like, but he's not supposed to know that he's going to die. It's not supposed to, and I don't understand why Scott Bakula, like, lost his mind, because he had the most important speech of all time to make in that episode, right? The beginning of the Federation, the start of the Federation, his amazing speech that he was going to make, right? That everyone learns in school, and they cut him off and the credits roll.
I know.
And they're like,
like,
what?
Yeah. Can we be bothered to write this speech sod it, you know.
I think
we can't be bothered.
If you were being charitable, I suppose some of the uncanniness of this could be down to the idea that this is a hollow program recording and maybe some of the details are off or some are wrong, but that's being really charitable. The reality is the actors involved were probably like, this is crap. Why are we like, you know, and they just couldn't really get into it. And like you say, poor writing, lazy writing, because the whole thing of it was described, wasn't it, as being a celebration of the Next Generation era, the run from 87 to 2005, essentially this 18-year Star Trek always on TV run. And they wanted to celebrate that as an overall thing. But it's just such a weird way of doing that when you've got, for one thing, on the show that's the furthest back and the furthest away from that era than any other show. Like, you know, it's so removed from the Next Generation era and from all those kind of things that to actually not end this on the Federation's rise properly, like you say, cutting him off halfway through his speech, he's mad. It's truly bonkers. And you do think, like, why would you sacrifice that? Why would you, even if you've got a truncated, you're not getting your 7 seasons, you're not going to be able to show the Romulan War and do all these things, build up to the Federation properly. Why would you not just do an episode that, a bit like, have you guys seen Babylon 5? I think, yes. A bit like Sleeping in Light at the end of Babylon 5, where it skips forward to the future, you know, and you do some sort of, you know, they could have easily done that with Enterprise and celebrated the end of that show with the Federation's rebirth and then do some flashback stuff to earlier, all the Romulan War, the things you missed. Do a cracking 2-part episode, maybe. Finish it off that way. But no. You do, they in this weird thing of wrapping up an era, which is very strange and very tricky to do, and they don't pull it off. You know, they don't know.
And the weird thing is, I think even if they had gone to 7 seasons, I think this would have been the finale. I think however long Enterprise ran,
probably
this was going to be the finale, because I think they'd written it and they at least drafted it or plotted it out before they even started the 4th season. I think a bit like, I mean, Babylon 5 had a similar thing, I think, with that episode, didn't they? That it was kind of held over from the 4th season to the 5th
for a year,
or something, because they got an extra year that they weren't expecting.
Yeah.
I think this was Berman and Braga's idea of how this show was going to end. I have to say, I wondered watching it. It crossed my mind, and I don't know, and, you know, I don't want to cast aspersions exactly, although I'm sure neither of them would exactly be defending this episode at this stage, but it made me wonder, when you see Enterprise episodes that are written by the two of them, we know Brannon Braga is a brilliant writer. I can't think if there's an episode that Rick Berman wrote on his own, or if we know much about him. Well, obviously we know him as a producer. Do we know much of him as a writer? I couldn't help thinking, did he just let Rick Berman write this song? you know, and it didn't get the kind of like second pass or whatever that was supposed to improve it a bit. You're right, Tony. There is a possibility that we can put all this down to a faulty holodeck program, and obviously in the novel verse there's this whole thing about how this story is inaccurate and actually Trip didn't die and it can be rewritten and so on. I think it's a really weird holodeck program, because I think obviously we have the idea of holo novels are interactive, but I suppose the idea of an interactive holo novel is that you can to some extent change the outcome, can't you? So even say the Alman Bashir storyline, I guess you can succeed or fail, but you can succeed in different ways. Like a lot of computer games, you can win this way, you can win that way, you can you can have slightly different outcomes depending on how you play and so on. When it's a historical document, it is a bit more tricky, because they have this, he keeps switching between objective mode and subjective mode, which basically means whether he's allowed to interact with them or not. So the objective mode, you get the sense he's basically just wandering around, a bit like Janeway is in Flashback, to be honest, sort of observing stuff, and she can't really affect anything. Okay, that kind of makes sense. But then once he's interacting with them, there's this weird sense that he actually can affect the story, which makes no sense if you think of this as this historical record. And we see that because when he has this conversation with, it's either Trip or T'Pol, maybe it's T'Pol, and he basically asks them, you know, because he clearly, like an Enterprise fan, is like shipping Trip and T'Pol and wants to know, you know, why did they break up and do they ever think of each other and so on. And then later on, we get this scene in the shuttlecraft where they have this kind of heart-to-heart moment of like, you know, have we, you know, do you still think about me and all this stuff, which clearly only happens because Riker has said that to them. Now that kind of creates this whole weird question of like, well, how much of this is history and how much of this is a program playing out? Because if he can have a conversation with someone which actually affects how they behave in a subsequent scene, then could he screw up the whole thing? Could he, get Archer to write a different speech? Could he, do you know what I mean? Could he save Trip? To what extent is that a historical program if he can actually influence the outcome of it? Ultimately, though, I don't think it makes sense. I think that's, another problem with this episode. So I'm not sure that the holo program makes sense. It's different from any holodeck program we've ever seen in Star Trek before. And although it seems to have its own rules and it kind of puts them up on screen and makes them quite in your face and obvious, even on its own terms, I'm not sure that it quite hangs together.
Even my husband, right, who's not a massive expert on Star Trek. I mean, who is except for us, But
there are probably a few people around the globe, Clara,
just one or two.
Title, but,
he's not kind of clued up on canon and history and everything. He said about Troy and Riker. He said, "Oh, so they're married at this point, right?" And I was like, "No, not at this point." He's like, "They're acting like they're married," and I'm like, "He's like, don't they get married? They get married. They're married, right? Aren't they married?" I'm like, "Yeah, but not in this point in Star Trek history." And that was another thing. Troy and Riker aren't acting like each other, and their relationship's not acting. But you make a valid point about Trip and T'Pol. How important is it for historical record to find out whether or not Trip and T'Pol are missing each other? I am all in favour of interspecies relationships in Star Trek. Vulcans, humans, Tellarites, Klingons, whatever makes you happy, right? But I don't think that the historical records would be this in depth to cover some a sort of ex-boyfriend and girlfriend conversation in a shuttlecraft. But if they are, how freaking terrifying is that? That means everything you do in Starfleet, who you sleep with, who you don't sleep with, any emotional relationships you have, is all covered by historical record. I mean, I was like, this is horrifying that Riker knows what went on between the two of them. How is that a matter of historical record?
This sort of raises all these questions. For Lower Decks, okay, obviously in Lower Decks, everyone in Lower Decks has seen Next Gen. Is familiar with all those stories. They know what happened. They've read the logs. Do they know about the time that Riker slept with Ro because they couldn't remember who each other was? Do you know what I mean? Do they know which holo programs people were running and when? I mean, how deep is this kind of invasion of privacy? Because we see Boimler in Lower Decks accessing the personal logs of the crew in order to create his weird holodeck, version of reality. Do they have this going back all the way? I mean, I don't know. Yeah, it's weird. Right. It raises. I mean, I think the Federation has some potentially weird kind of privacy issues, but this definitely brings up. But also, I have to say, I sort of wondered, I can kind of get if it's known that they had this doomed tragic romance and they had the baby that died and all this stuff, and I can sort of see that's something that would be a matter of public record because it ties into the sort of story, it's say in Terra Prime of what's going on. I can see that people reading history might think, oh, that's an engaging sort of story or whatever. I don't know though. It still seems weird. There's something strange about it. There's something kind of. It just feels wrong. I don't know. I can sort of get it on one level. I can get, if Troy was coming in and saying, "Oh, I don't know. I don't know how they could sell that." I feel like there is a way they could sell that, but they don't do it. If you know what I mean.
But it's because it doesn't make sense.
It's also that it assumes that everyone is as invested in it as the presumed Enterprise viewer is, who's presumably pretty pissed off that they've just said, oh, it's 6 years since we last went out. Okay, at the end of the previous episode, they had this, tragic experience, but they were together, they were kind of sharing a moment together, etc. Their relationship seemed quite strong. We've just been told, oh yeah, that never happened. Yeah, we split up, whatever, forget about it. But it presumes that somehow that we don't even need a sort of explanation of the fact that Riker is really invested in this or cares about this or interested in this,
But this is why it's a cheat, and this is why when you say that, it doesn't make any sense, it's exactly the point, in that this is an episode entirely constructed around the real world production aspects, in the sense that Enterprise was being cancelled and they had what they thought was this genius idea of trying to, do both, of trying to actually appease all the people who were just pining a little bit for the next gen era, and also all the Enterprise fans who wanted to see the show conclude, and they end up doing neither very well because they're so weirdly wedged together in order to celebrate two things at once that don't in any way combine. And I think that's one of the reasons we're having to think about all these intricacies and all these weird things that crop up, because in reality, if things had gone correctly, they would have done these moments and actually told these stories with these characters properly in a proper conclusion. Whether or not they would have been able to do all this in 1 or 2 episodes, probably not, of a normal Enterprise story. It would have been difficult to wrap everything up, but they could have done things differently and made it more logically dramatic and just added about those characters, those Enterprise characters. Feels like, as well, this is almost a little bit of a sign of what we will later get with Star Trek beyond this point, which is entirely about looking back at previous eras and previous characters like we've talked about, because the next one obviously is the Abrams reboot universe, which is entirely based around the past and about rebooting and everything like that. So it feels like this is the point where Star Trek sort of completely breaks from any attempt to create something completely fresh and original and new without any connections back to the past in order to celebrate.
Up until Picard, maybe. Oh, without any Yeah, I agree. Absolutely.
Do you know what I mean?
Connections back to the past. Yeah, you're right. I mean, insofar as even the stuff that's going forward is going forward and taking the past.
Exactly.
Whether it's Picard, whether it's Janeway, it's taking something, whether it's Lower Decks, which is obsessed with Next Gen, you're right. It's always dragging something forward into the future with it. Yeah, I think that's absolutely, it's an interesting point. We're all Riker, basically. Star Trek, since this point, Star Trek went off the air with, Riker interposing himself into this episode he has no business being in. And since then, that is the perspective almost. We are Riker in, whatever it is, objective mode. And that's kind of what we're getting. Well, Tony, you mentioned the JJ verse, and I mean, yes, absolutely. The JJ verse obviously took us back to this kind of way of another form of nostalgia for the original series. But in terms of doing these kind of special anniversary installments, it's really the third JJ, well, not the non-JJ, I think he produced it, didn't he? But the one that he didn't direct, Beyond, which is the movie that kind of happened to fall in the 50th anniversary year. And because sadly, Discovery didn't air until the following year. It's a shame they couldn't kind of get their act together to get that going a bit sooner. But, it was another anniversary where Star Trek wasn't on the air as a TV show. So Beyond, I think, really took on that mantle of trying to hit the kind of nostalgia fest buttons. A little bit like it seemed to me there's a real parallel between the way they did it with Beyond and the way they did it with Skyfall for the James Bond franchise, which also was a 50th anniversary film, and also kind of dropped in all these little references, these little kind of nuggets. But definitely Beyond seemed like, as much as it was a film that sort of worked on its own terms, it was also trying to sort of drop these little nuggets in for the fans as a way of sort of saying, yeah, we're not doing an anniversary special, like Doctor Who, for example. They did a big, sort of big spectacular sort of TV movie type special. But, we are going to acknowledge that this is, at least subtly acknowledge that this is a kind of special moment.
It's weird, actually, because Beyond, like you say, it's a bit of both. It's like, it's the first Abrams verse film that is trying to maybe be its own beast in many ways, completely, especially after Into Darkness, which is great. And it's sort of going, but I remember the trailers and everything, thinking of the trailers and that, thinking about, this is where the frontier pushes back, and I was, we're going to, explore all that kind of thing. And it's basically just like an action adventure TOS episode, just with a bigger budget, that whole film. But then it still has these moments, like you say. I mean, the big one is the goose pimple moment where Spock opens the envelope or the box or whatever, and he sees the crew, the original series crew, but from like the Undiscovered Country or whenever it was. And that's a goose pimple moment. I think I remember thinking, oh wow, that's amazing, especially given a few of them are no longer with us. So it's the film's almost working on a meta level to some extent. Those whole films are really, aren't they? But especially with old Spock, because that's kind of in the 3 films, but he's obviously passed away because Leonard Nimoy's passed away. But you're watching those films with that almost meta knowledge as an audience member of what's come before, even though these characters don't really know, apart from Leonard Nimoy in those first 2 films. So it's working on a different level in a way than some of these other Celebration episodes are, or films and these kind of things. while also trying to do its own thing. And I think it's relatively successful in a way. You know, I think it does both quite well. I think in a way I like the fact it's not just a complete, you know, anniversary geek fest that's just massively trying to recapture things in the past. I like the fact it's just trying to be as pure a Star Trek sort of adventure movie as it can be. You know, I think that's to its credit. And I think, in a way, there was almost as much going on in the fan circles for the 50th as on screen. You know, you had conventions, you had celebrations, you had all podcast, like the Trek FM podcast, from here to there, from there to here, from there to here, from here to there,
there to here, yeah,
from there to here. There we go.
That'll be the next one for another 50 years.
Yeah, the next one. So yeah, you had a real sort of, you know, with the online fan base of Star Trek, which as we know is fantastic. You had lots going on in both realms, really. So I think it was good, even though maybe it would have been great to have a series, like you say. I think Beyond does a good job of celebrating.
Yeah, I think Beyond does do a good job of celebrating. I agree with you that it's kind of its own beast, and I think that's one of the reasons why it's the best of the, well, I mean, I'm sure people will disagree with me, but that's one of the reasons why I think it's the best of the three Kelvin universe reboot movies. I think that the second one, Into Darkness, I don't have massive objections to the film. I do enjoy it. But I do recognise that it's kind of rehashing old history. And that's kind of a little bit like what happened with, you know, maybe not completely, but kind of happened a little bit with these are the Voyagers, and also some of the newer stuff. I think what surprises me, and I think Into Star Trek Into Beyond sort of proves this point that I'm going to make, is what surprises me is why the creators of Star Trek continually try to bring in old characters or hark back to previous stories or previous things in Star Trek as sort of like a fan service. And that actually, what I think a lot of Star Trek fans would also like is, I mean, they like that stuff too, but it's almost like cashing in on an audience that have liked something before, so you kind of repeat that thing before, or you hark back to that thing before, when actually they shouldn't be frightened. I think the Star Trek fans and the world are very, very open to new storylines and new characters, and they've shown that with Discovery and the Discovery crew, but as they showed that to a certain extent in Star Trek Beyond. Like, I know that it's still Spock and Kirk and McCoy, but like Yorktown, you know, is it Yorktown? Yeah. And then Jayla, exactly. Jayla's massively popular, and we never seen her before. So I sort of think there's something to be said for producers or production companies making the decision to rehash something. I mean, that they know there's already an audience out there for, right? But the thing about the Star Trek audience is that they're interested in new stories. I mean, that's the whole nature of like Star Trek, is discovering new worlds and new species and going out and doing new things. There's something kind of curious and exploratory about the fans themselves. So I would be interested to see an anniversary episode a little bit more where they have something completely new and original, but just make it like the best writing you can, the best characterization, the best acting, the best special effects. Like, just get 5-star of everything and throw it together, and then, like, you know, put it out there. And I think the fans would be absolutely delighted. I think that you shouldn't worry too much about having to always hark back like an in-joke to something that we already know about, because we're already here, we're already ready, and we're already wanting it. So give us something new, you know?
And I guess the thing is that as much as we enjoy those little references and those little nuggets and so on, it's not enough to rest on those. And I think maybe that's the problem, say, with something like Flashback, is that's an episode that is sort of resting on the goodwill that it's assuming it's going to get from the audience, and kind of failing to do anything beyond that stuff. Do you know what I mean? And not really managing to craft an interesting story in its own right. Whereas something like, obviously, Trials and Tribulations, you know, is doing something much more creative. Even something like Timeless, you know, Tony, like you said, is just a really great Voyager episode. And it would be on lots of people's top 10 Voyager episodes lists, even if it was episode 99 or episode 101 or, you know, whatever it is. The fact that it's episode 100 is sort of a little extra bow that is kind of tied on the top, and that is kind of feels just slightly teased, as I say, I think by, the champagne and the confetti and all this sort of stuff that's thrown into it, and this kind of air of celebration, and the fact that they make it a key episode because they do cut 10 years off the journey. So it is kind of a pivot point for the show, in the way that, like I sort of argued, the ship is kind of a pivot point for DS9. It's something that's kind of saying, okay, there's what we've done before and here's what we can do going forward. There's kind of a sense of like, this is a moment of a turn, or somehow it's kind of a significant moment, but that it's really not enough just to do the kind of bells and whistles without having something more to it, as much as we enjoy those kind of extras. With that in mind, obviously this is our 100th episode. I mean, I'm aware we've kind of slightly broken our format a little bit, or at least bent our format, in that we're just talking about these random Star Trek episodes. I have a little something extra that I want to try with the two of you. You obviously are both very key parts of primitive culture. Tony going right back to the beginning, Clara going back pretty early. I think the first episode we recorded together was maybe like episode 6 or 7, something like that, quite early on, that we recorded at the South Bank Centre. It was the first time I think you came onto the show. I have got a quiz for the two of you to see which of you will be crowned the ultimate former primitive culture co-host. So we're going to find out how much you remember from these 100 episodes, and which of you is going to come out on top. So
Clara,
if you're ready,
this is going to be brutal, Clara. It is.
It's really brutal.
Fingers on buzzers. Actually, you don't need buzzers to begin with. We might need some buzzers later on. But I'm going to ask a couple of questions, and whichever of you either gets the answer right or gets closest to the right answer.
We need a Star Trek sound effect.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah. Well, we'll see. Hopefully, whoever ends up.
I'm going to do the doors. I'm going to do the doors.
Yeah. Okay. There are a maximum of 20 points, but they're going to be divided between the two of you. And so whoever gets, I'm keeping a tally here, and whoever gets the most points wins. Okay, the first question is to both of you. Out of the two of you, who has appeared on more episodes of Primitive Culture? I'll ask Tony first.
I think maybe me, but by a very small margin.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and Clara?
Yeah, I would say Tony.
Well, you're both wrong.
Actually, it's me.
Okay, no, I'm not counting me. Out of the two of you, I will tell you, Clara has appeared on more episodes of Primitive Culture, which surprised me in a way, because I was going back, I guess because Clara, you were a regular co-host for
that's true,
for a year, I think, with me, whereas Tony's been kind of back and forth, and recently Tony's been back more, but
yeah, see, that's why I said it, because I know you guys have recorded recently.
Have you got the numbers there?
Go back, check out. Well, I have got the numbers here, but this is going to be
this is the next question.
Right, okay.
So you're on 0 points each so far.
Oh, great.
But for this question, whoever gets closest is going to get the point. Okay. How many episodes of Primitive Culture has Tony appeared on? Not including this one. I'm not counting this one.
Oh.
Bearing in mind, there have been 90. Well, there haven't actually. There have been, as I say, there were a couple of bonuses, so there have been.
We just don't know how many there are.
I think by this point.
Oh, right. Okay. I'm gonna guess 22. That's gonna be my guess.
22. Okay.
Wow. And that's quite low. I was going to guess more than that.
Well, Clara, what's your guess for Tony? How many episodes he's been on?
I'm going to guess 43. Tony's
wow.
like,
Okay. Now I have to do my maths. Okay. So the correct answer is 30.
Hang on. Are we counting two-parters as well?
Yeah, I count them as two.
Okay.
Or do you want to change? Does that affect
how many two-parters?
I can't even remember anymore.
This could be a future. This could be a future question. I think off the top of my head, since I was going through our back catalogue earlier today, and some of this is more fresh than it might be. I think Tony and I have done one two-parter, and Clara and I have done two two-parters. I think. Okay. But then Tony and I did two parts. Actually, that's not true, because Tony and I have done 2 parts of our multi-part naming.
Does that count, though? Does that count? I don't know if that counts.
I'm counting in a separate episode.
Do you think
I don't know if it counts two-parter. Okay. It's not a question. Anyway, so, Tony, you said 22 episodes. Clara said 43.
Stop splitting hairs.
The correct answer is 32, which means that Tony, by one, is closer. So Tony gets the point.
That is
for that one. Okay.
That was close.
So
that's a lot of episodes.
Yeah, that's a lot of episodes.
You undersold yourself there.
I did.
Yeah. I did. So just under a third of episodes.
Okay.
Now, Clara, bear in mind you know that yours is higher than 32 because I've already told you that. How many episodes do you think you've appeared on?
I'm going to say all 100.
You were always there, Clara, even when you weren't.
Yeah. Always like a ghost. Let me think. So he was 30. What?
He was 32.
He was 32. I'm going to say like 42.
Okay.
42. Okay. And Tony, how many episodes do you think Clara was on?
I think I'm going to go for the late 40s. 48, maybe. Something like that.
48. Right. Okay. Well, Clara wins the point because the correct answer is 36. So there's only 4 episodes.
There's not much in it.
It was fairly close. Yeah. It was pretty close.
So we've both almost done a third.
Yeah. Both done around a third. Yeah.
Oh, it's not bad.
You are level pegging on 1 point each.
Cool. It's all to play for.
Okay, and what about me? How many episodes of Primitive Culture have I appeared on?
Every single one.
How many?
I don't think you have, because I'm pretty sure there was an episode that you and I did, Clara, just us, back in the day.
Oh, on fan fiction.
So maybe he's appeared on 99. Yeah, it could be. I think you've only not appeared on one episode.
But bear in mind what I said about this being the 100th episode recorded and the episode 100, but not actually the 98th episode of Primitive Culture.
98.
Okay, whatever the number is, deduct 1. That's the number I'm going for.
So what are you going to go for? I'm going to push you both to answer. Tony, give me a number.
I will say 101 then, in that case.
Okay, and Clara?
Oh, wait. So you're saying you recorded more than 100 now?
Yeah, because there were supplemental episodes, so...
See, there was a clue early in this episode, you know.
Oh, okay, so... Oh, yeah, okay, so I'll go for 101 too.
You both get a point. Congratulations.
I feel like you did the thinking for me.
Did we...
Maths, numbers.
Bang on the money.
I'll let Tony figure it out.
101.
Did we get this bang right, Duncan? Did we get the number right?
You got this right. You both got that right. You got that right.
Oh, no, that's so cool.
Amazing.
Okay.
Oh, I feel like we should get you a cake.
Yeah.
Star Trek uniform. I think we should give you like a Star Trek rank, you know? Like, you should be captain.
Captain Barrett.
Admiral, at least.
Vice Admiral.
Surely. Yeah. Okay. Next question. What is this? Question 5, I think.
4.
The longest episode of Primitive Culture to the nearest minute. How many minutes? I mean, how many hours and how many minutes would you say it is?
Was this the one we did on Father's Day?
I don't think that was such a long one, but
thank God. No, that's fine.
I'm not asking you to guess which one it was. I'll tell you which one it was when I give you the answer. But how long do you think we've gone?
I think it's over the 2-hour mark. I reckon maybe it's one of the ones that you've done with Zachary Frulin. Maybe, I don't know. I'm going to say 2 hours 10 minutes.
2 hours 10. And Clara?
I'm going to say 2 hours and 59 minutes. Exactly.
Do you think we've done a 3-hour
podcast?
Oh yeah.
Maybe that will happen one day. Maybe.
It's not hard. You know it's not hard. Come on.
Okay. I'm afraid I'm going to have to give Tony the point for that one.
Yes.
2 hours 5 minutes is actually the longest we've gone. And it was on episode 93 quite recently. It was actually one that Lee Hutchison and I did in the never-ending Star Trek episode names series, which was meant to be a short, light bit of fun and has turned into a kind of
nightmare.
Massive, I think that's quite restrained, to be honest.
Yeah.
Millstone
2 hours,
around my
5
neck.
minutes. It's the
2
sweet
hours, 5
spot.
minutes. I know, yeah. And that was for a couple of seasons of DS9 and 1 or 2 of Voyager. Okay. Right, the shortest episode. Now, I'm not counting here when we've had just like an interview with one sort of celebrity or whatever, because some of those were very short. But the shortest episode that is a discussion of some kind, but that includes discussions out and about at conventions, at the cinema, etc.
Right. I reckon, because some of the ones we did maybe at DST or various places were a bit short, or at the Prince Charles and things like that. I'm going to say about 38 minutes. That's my guess.
Okay, and Clara?
I'm going to say 45 minutes.
Okay, now... Okay, the answer is... That is Tony's going to get that one, because the answer is 40 minutes and 31 seconds.
40 minutes.
Tony is
winning here.
In the lead.
Racing ahead.
There's all to play for.
Which episode was it?
It was episode 69, which was recorded at Destination Star Trek last year, which was about fan encounters. Basically, meeting your idols and not making a fool of yourself in the process. So we were talking about Barclay and Zefram Cochrane and moments like that in Star Trek.
Cool.
Okay.
That's a good subject.
Next question. How many episodes have been recorded on location? And I'm not counting in this, Clara, when we recorded at your office. I'm not counting when I recorded...
That's the location.
Sorry.
That feels like a very exotic location these days.
Yeah.
I guess what I'm saying is I'm counting when the location was, either kind of relevant or it was kind of meaningful that we met up or whatever, rather than, say, when I did an episode...
that Amy was staying in.
Yeah, exactly. Not the flat that Amy was staying in. When I was in Dublin, I went to see Darren Mooney and recorded in his house. I'm not really counting that as a location. I'm counting, the Royal Albert Hall, Destination Star Trek, these kind of things. The Prince Charles Cinema.
There's been a few of them. There have been quite a few, I think. So I will say... I'm going to say about 10, I think.
Okay, 10.
And that might be too low.
So 1 in 10 episodes, that would be. Yeah, Clara?
Are you including pubs?
Yeah. If the pub... I think we've only recorded in a pub when we were at some other location that maybe was too noisy or something. Yeah.
Okay, so you're not including... Pubs. You would count pubs.
Remember we went to pubs? Remember those days?
I know, yeah.
Exotic, real exotic, I'm going to say about 7.
7, okay. I'm afraid Tony gets it again. The correct
Sorry.
answer is 15.
I thought I was too low. Yeah. I'm not sure.
15?
This is a mobile show, we can record anywhere.
I never would have guessed that many.
Duncan, we did one sitting on a table outside of, I don't know where we were going, but we were in London, weren't we? And we were talking
in a wine bar.
Yeah.
With all the veterans. Do you remember?
Right.
The extremely elderly veterans.
Was that when helicopters?
Yes,
there were. Helicopters were circling. Yeah.
Yeah. And we were
counting that as a location, even though it was just kind of that we needed a place. But,
we were looking for somewhere to...
met up. We met up and we looked for a place. Yeah. Cool. Okay.
Wow.
There you go. 15% of Primitive Culture recorded on location. Okay. Next question. When I went back and looked at some of our early episodes, I noticed that they tended to be on the shorter side than some of the ones we record now. So with that in mind, how many of these 100 odd episodes would you say are under an hour in length?
Oh, there can't be that many of this. There can't be.
This episode, I have to tell you, is not going to be one of them.
Anyway. Definitely not.
Just knowing how much the three of us like to talk, I can't actually believe there's that many of them.
No. I think about 4. I'm going quite low for this.
Wow, okay.
Well, I'm clearly wrong there. He's just giving it away.
So under an hour, right? Is what you said?
And that does it. If you want to just... Sorry, I wasn't trying to rubbish your answer, Tony. But that does include,
it's fine.
interviews with one person or whatever, of which there are a few. So...
Yeah, okay.
Nudge it up a bit if you want to.
Okay, I'm going to say...
I'm going to...
No, don't give him another chance.
I'm sticking with 4. If only to give you a point,
okay,
Clara.
Tony's sticking with 4.
I'm sticking with 4.
Go on, then.
I'm losing here. I'm dying. You need to
I'm giving you a point.
Help me out.
It's a pity point.
Let's see,
because,
So bittersweet. I'm going to say 25. I'm going to say 25.
Right. Okay. The
I've kind of forgotten how many
answer is 13, which means Clara is 12 off and Tony is 9 off. So I'm afraid
so Tony still
gets the point. Sorry.
Amazing.
The pity point.
I'm sorry, Clara.
I can't even win a pity point. It's that bad.
It's all right.
Some
it's all right.
losers
You're
are just always going to be losers.
Clara, you could still win, I think. There are enough points left to go.
Just
about.
Right, now this is an interesting one, I think. Obviously, I mentioned that each of you has done around a third of the total episodes. There have been about 100 episodes. And bearing in mind that sometimes we've had roundtable discussions with a number of people present, how many different guests in total have appeared on Primitive Culture, not counting the three of us?
Oh, crikey. That's going to be a good number, I think. I'm going to go for about 30 here. I think there's been quite a few people come on over the time, especially given we've done a group of people sitting around a table. So I could even be too low there, actually. I'll stick with 30.
Clara?
I'm gonna go for a higher number again, just because that's worked so well for me so far. I'm gonna go for 40.
Yeah. 40. Well, Clara, you get the point.
Yes.
The correct answer is actually 50.
Finally.
50 guests.
Finally,
plus the three of us
man.
means there have been 53
I feel like
voices.
a Klingon right now.
Yeah.
53.
So,
wow.
Yeah, which
amazing.
surprised me. It's more than I was expecting.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Just to prove it, and also because it's our 100th episode, and I feel it's a way of thanking all these people for making this show what it has been, I'm going to read you the list.
Go for it.
So these are the 50 people who've appeared on Primitive Culture. You may recognise some of their names. Erin Harvey, Alexander Siddig, Amy Nelson, Andy Pulastides, Ben Cook, Ben Keeling, Brandy Jackala, Brandon Shea Matala, Brannon Braga, Carlos Miranda, Casey Biggs, Chase Masterson, Chris Nunn, Dan Davidson, Dana Kazim, Darren Mooney, Drew Barker, Ethan Siegel, Greg Cox, Guinevere Nell, Ira Stephen Bear, Jeffrey Combs, John Krikorian, Justin Ozer, Kay Shaw, Keith DeCandido, Larry Nemeczek, Laura Perkins, Lee Hutchison, Leslie Eager, Manu Sadia, Mike Schindler, Murray Christensen, Nanar Visitor, Nicholas Meyer, Nicole de Boer, Peter Organ, Rick Everson, Rick Sternbach, Rob Chapman, Susan Eldin, Terry Parsons, The Trekkie Girls, Tony Robinson, Una McCormack, Will Wynn, Zach Moore and Zachary Fruling.
Never heard of any of them.
So those... that is the illustrious guest cast of Primitive Culture.
Yeah,
it's up there with DS9 in terms of the guests that we've called on.
Just imagining their names scrolling up like credits,
Yeah.
Very
the
quickly,
stars in the background.
There you go.
Our names will be signed in our handwriting at the end of this.
Absolutely. Yeah. The three of us come at the end.
Signature.
We get to do that. Oh, damn. I've skipped my question. I've ruined my next question because I was going to ask you to name some. Damn. Okay.
That's okay. I think it's still a good question because, our memory.
Shall we, through the magic of Ed? No, I'm not going to skip the question. I'm sorry. Oh, that's a shame. I was going to see if you could think of any.
Never mind.
Fine, we'll skip that one. Or maybe I should just give you both a point for that because I was going to.
Yes, please.
I'm going to assume that you would. I'm going to assume you would have got that right if I hadn't fumbled.
Yeah.
If I hadn't fumbled the questions, you would both have come up. And I'm hoping that Clara, you would at least have got your husband as one of your. That's one of your 5 I was asking you to suggest, but we'll never know. Sorry. Okay.
I would have loved it if she hadn't. That would have been amazing to hear.
I think it's very high chance that I wouldn't have, to be honest. The way things are going, I wouldn't have.
Okay, so at the halfway point, Tony is on 7 points, Clara is on 4 points. There are 10 points left to go.
Okay.
Now is when you need to have your fingers on the buzzers. We're kind of going University Challenge style here.
Okay.
This is a round called Guess the Titles. I'm going to give you the name of an episode. I need you to buzz if you think you know what that episode was about.
Okay.
If you get it right, you get a point. If you get it wrong, I pass it over to the other side for the chance to steal a point, and then we continue. Okay. So, question 1. Death by alien badgers.
Ooh, Oh, I remember this time.
Anyone going to buzz? Make a guess. Birmingham Black.
Weird creatures in Star Trek.
That is incorrect. Clara, would you like a chance to steal this point? Death by alien badgers.
Death by alien badgers. Okay, death by alien badgers. Massive mistakes that Captain Janeway has made.
Those would be the lizard babies, surely not the alien badgers. No, I'm afraid that is also the wrong answer. The correct answer, Clara, this was one you and I did together. This was an episode about red shirt deaths and the trope of the red shirts. Yes. And it was called episode 37.
Oh my God.
Death by alien badgers.
Yes.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. That
was a fun episode. On
to question 2. Fingers on buzzers. The mother of all resolutions.
I can see we're both going to be great.
This is going to be terrible podcast listening, isn't it?
The mother of all resolutions.
Birmingham Black.
So, Clara, you need your voice. You need your noise, by the way. You need to figure out your buzzer noise. Your Star Trek buzzer noise. I'm going to say...
She's got props. She's
Getting my
reaching
phone
for something. Okay.
I will say New Year's Eve episodes, things like 11:59 or something like that.
It's a good guess, but it's not the one. But I would say you're, sort of heading in the right direction. Clara, do you want a chance to steal this point?
She's busy for...
You don't need to buzz yet.
Did you hear that?
That's brilliant.
Very good. Yeah.
Did you even hear that? Okay, so
the mother.
What was the question again?
The mother of all resolutions. I should say, for the listeners, and also for the two of you, in case you haven't thought of this, our episode titles always by Trek FM edict have to be taken from a phrase that was spoken in the episode. So that's where all of these titles are things that someone has said during the course of the episode in question.
Mm.
I think this has to do with Picard and A Christmas Carol.
Correct. You win the point.
Yes.
Well done.
I mean, Picard and resolutions is going to be...
Very good.
Okay. I'm ready.
Okay, question 3. Fingers on buzzers. Tit for tat. Birmingham Black. You have to have an answer. You can't just buzz to stop Clara buzzing.
Scoundrels in Star Trek.
It is not scoundrels in Star Trek. Okay. Clara, would you like to try and steal this point?
I think it's to do with trying to get around the censorship in the costumes of the original series.
Is this like what was referred to as the nipple memo that they used to get?
Exactly.
If you showed too many nipples, you got. It is not.
I wish it had
nothing
been.
So crude.
That title was amazing.
Yeah, if we do, we'll have to do tit for tat part 2 if we ever get around to doing something on costumes in the original series. No, this was an episode that Justin Ozer and I recorded, episode 39, which was on Catch 22 and MASH and Treachery, Faith and the Great River, in which Nog is trading objects for other objects in a madcap comedic fashion. Okay. Fingers on buzzers. This is an episode that you both, I believe, appeared on. Diversity is survival.
We're terrible.
Wow, we have great memories.
Clara. We really are.
Diversity is survival. Diversity is survival.
It wasn't any of us who said this line, if that helps. It probably doesn't. But
Diversity is survival.
It was someone we were speaking to who said this to us. Birmingham Black.
Is this one of the interviews we did at DST? Is this the one we did with Una McCormack?
I'm going to give you the point because it is the same episode as when we spoke to Una McCormack. Cool. So I'm going to give you a point for that. It was episode 43 on the Deep Space Nine documentary premiere at DST. Clara, for the opportunity of an extra point, who do you think said this expression, diversity is survival? Who that we interviewed that wasn't Una McCormack? said this to us?
Iris Stephen Bear?
No, but it's a good guess. It was actually Alexander Siddig.
I thought when you said that
him.
it was. Yeah.
Bless him.
That was a great interview.
Okay.
That was.
Good quote, Alexander.
He was a very, very charming interviewee, I have to say, on the red carpet. He was, absolutely on good form. Okay, question 5. Fingers on buzzers. And this is a tricky one because it could almost refer to 2 episodes that we've done, and I'm not going to tell you, obviously, which one it is, but you can take a guess. Size does matter.
Oh,
I think Clara picked you to the post there. I'm going to say London Cook.
Yes. So it was to do with the tiny ship. Was it to do with the
I'm really sorry, Clara. It wasn't.
Honey, I Shrunk the Tiny Ship?
That was what I was going to say. That was
the other one. That was the other one. Okay, Tony, it wasn't that one. Tony has a chance to steal. It wasn't that episode. Something else that we talked about with the title Size Does Matter.
Oh, my God. Size does matter.
So it can't be tiny, it has to be big, right?
Giants?
Giants in Star Trek? No, it was not. It was not about giants in Star Trek.
Spock?
This was episode 50 on the short treks. But I put it in there as a bit of a trick question because I kind of expected someone to guess that it was about the episode you're thinking of, Clara.
that.
I think we did call Honey, I Shrunk the Runabout, which was
That's
the
the
working title
one.
of that episode.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, fingers on buzzers yet again. Next question: who am I?
Oh,
I have no idea.
I know this.
Would it help if I sang it for you?
Yeah, go on.
Who am I? Birmingham Black?
This is.
Wait.
Well, you're about to sing the Star Trek theme tune, and the original. No. Okay.
Sadly not.
No, okay, I don't know then. I'm completely
And I don't
wrong.
even know the next line of the song, so...
No, I'm wrong. I've no idea.
This was this to do with that like lounge singer in DS9? What's his name?
Vic Fontaine.
Vic.
It
Was
was
to do
not
with
to
Vic
do with Vic
Fontaine.
Fontaine. This was an episode... Clara, you appeared on this episode. Since you have the opportunity of stealing this point, I'm going to tell you this.
Who am I? Who am I, Duncan? I have no idea.
You appeared on this episode, and it did involve discussion of
Am
something
I a podcaster?
that includes a bit of singing.
Oh, holy God. Was this at the South Bank? No, it couldn't have been. It wasn't to do with music in Star Trek, was it? No, so the singing is like a red herring, right?
I was
you
just singing the line because it is a line from a song, but the episode itself is not primarily about singing. But obviously the title of the episode was taken from a song.
I have no idea.
Oh my God, no, I have no idea.
This was episode number 55 on Les Miserables. And that was my best Jean Valjean.
Who sing? I have no idea that they sang that in Les Miserables. Couldn't you have sung something like "I Dreamed a Dream" or something?
I could have, but that wasn't the title of the episode.
Or couldn't you have been like teeth falling out, stealing? Hey, who sings "Who Am I"? Is it Jean
Valjean.
His name is
Jean Valjean.
Okay.
Sings "Who Am I?"
So you can see I've really kept sharpen my memory right there.
Okay. All right, next question. Fingers on buzzers.
Oh my God.
Checkmate. Birmingham Black.
This was you and I talking about The Prisoner and Move Along Home.
Very good. Yes. Correct,
Yay!
Tony. Sorry,
That
Clara.
was
I
a
think
good
you
one.
were just slightly behind him there with the.
I was like, chess.
Well, it was a good guess. That was the correct answer, basically. Yeah. But we were talking about The Prisoner, Move Along Home, and Deadly Games, I think.
Alan Moraine.
As well. There you go. Clara, it's going to be your turn to sing
Alan
next.
Moraine.
Okay. Right. I'm not going to sing this one, even though it does sound like a lyric. Would I lie to you?
Charles and Eddie, that one, wasn't it?
Would I lie to you?
Oh! That's the one.
London Cook.
Is this got something to do with Garrick? No. I'm just thinking of a character that lies in Star Trek. Was I in this one? Would I lie to you? Sounds familiar to me.
This was actually
really
an episode that Tony and I did together.
Yeah, this I know. I remember. I remember the title.
I think I've listened to it though because it sounds really familiar.
Would I lie to you? Oh,
it's got something to do with spies and subterfuge and espionage. I don't know. The wrong tree entirely.
I don't know. It's gonna. As soon as you say it, it's gonna click, isn't it? But yeah.
You're flawed, the two of you. This was about the Next Gen episode, A Matter of Perspective, and the movie Rashomon.
Rashomon! Yeah! That wasn't that long ago either. My memory's terrible. That was about a year ago. It's really bad.
Okay. Next episode, Clara, this is an episode that you appeared on. Because you're behind, I'm giving you that as a clue. But fingers on buzzers, whoever can buzz in first. This episode was called The Game.
Wait, I was on this? Oh, man. There's just so many games in Star Trek.
Birmingham Black.
Is this literally like what it says in the tin? Is this like deadly games in Star Trek? Like things that go wrong?
No, because we've already done that one.
Oh, no. I know. Oh, yeah. No, I know.
No, you don't get a second. Hang on. You don't get a second guess. Clara has the chance to steal this one.
I think
so Tony thinks he knows the answer.
I think I do.
Well, if you're feeling generous, you can give Clara a clue.
Okay, I might be wrong, Clara, but I'm going to say the word animals.
Okay, I have no idea what that refers to.
Right, I am wrong then. So ignore me completely. Ignore me completely, Clara, because I'm clearly wrong.
But now all I can think about is animals in Star Trek. Wait.
Animals playing chess, right?
I can do this. I know we were going to do an episode on animal rights, but I don't think we ever got to
I think that's what I was going for.
It can't be that. That hasn't happened yet. This is like one of those weird Star Trek episodes where they go into the future.
Yeah.
You know. Let me think. The game. Yeah.
Who famously refers to a game?
Oh, wait. Oh, yeah. Somebody in the undiscovered country? No.
Sort of, very loosely.
Is this where
maybe?
Is this where we learn that like lots of people on Star Trek have referred to things as games?
Not quite. It's not. This is not an episode about games, to be clear. So Tony and I did do an episode about games. This is not an episode about games. This is an episode about something that is referred to famously in a well-known catchphrase quoted in Star Trek as the game.
I feel like this has something to do with, like, either it has something to do with the holodeck or it has something to do with, oh my God, of course it does. It's the one about Sherlock Holmes.
Correct.
Yes.
Ding, ding, ding. Okay, point to Clara.
I feel like that point wasn't deserved. I'm sorry. I feel ashamed of that point. We recorded that episode not that long ago.
That's okay. It was a deceptively simple title for a complicated topic. Okay, last question. I think, without spoiling it, I think Tony is probably too far in the lead to be caught up with. But for, honour is at the stake. Yeah. The last episode, fingers on buzzers, appropriately for our final question, the best is yet to come. Birmingham Black.
Bada bada bing bing and Ocean's 11. I got that wrong. What did I say? Bada bada bing. You know the one I mean. Yeah.
Clara, if you can get the DS9 episode right, I'll give you the point for this one.
I've remembered it now. I can't remember it.
Bing, bada, bing.
Yeah, okay, all right. I'm gonna give it to Tony. Bada Bing, Bada Bang is the name of the episode.
Bang.
And yes, it was about Bada Bing, Bada Bang and Ocean's 11.
I think
episode 86.
Clara, I think yours was worse. Your Bing Bing Bada Bing.
Bada Bada Bing Bang. Isn't that the Witch Doctor song? Do you know that one?
Bang,
ooh-ee, ooh-ah-ah, bing bang, bada bada,
bada bing bang.
Bing. Yeah, anyway.
It is.
Something like that.
God.
Okay. Drum roll, please. The results are... Clara is in second place on 6 points, and Tony is in the lead on 10 points. So Tony is crowned the official champion co-host of Primitive Culture.
Thank you.
In the episode 100 quiz.
We were both a shambles, however, so, I'm not going to take any applause there at all.
Yeah, I do sort of feel like it's like we both got the lower end of the spectrum of what we could have got.
Absolutely.
Out of 50 points, you got 10 and you got 6.
But remember, Clara, when you and I went to the Star Trek pub quiz in that pub in West London, we actually won. And do you remember? I don't know about you, Tony, but Clara and I have won a Star Trek pub quiz. So,
I mean, that was glorious.
Don't forget.
That's like the only quiz
I don't think I've ever won a quiz ever. So, yeah. Fair play.
Well, if they ever run one of those again, Tony, look out for it. But yeah, cool.
Yeah.
So everyone's a winner. It's been a pleasure having you both back on the show. I think all that remains is I've got the dregs of my glass of wine here with me. I don't have any champagne, sadly, but to drink a toast to Primitive Culture and to the two of you. And to say thank you to both of you for joining me once again and for joining me many times, as we've heard over the years. And here's to many more episodes to come, hopefully.
Absolutely.
Cheers.
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 Kapla.
They're all going to hear us swallow.
But thank you both of you for joining me as ever. It's been a lot of fun.
It's a pleasure. Thanks, Duncan.
Well, thank you for having us, Duncan. It's been absolute joy.
And you'll be back for episode 200, right?
Yeah. We'll blink and it'll be there. We'll still be in lockdown.
Should we make it that far?
We will pay very close attention to all the titles of the epises.
I should hope
I'll
so.
memorise them.
I should hope so. I should have said at the beginning, any listeners, feel free to, it's a bit late now, but, feel free to play along. Let us know if you were playing along on your own initiative. Let us know how you scored.
Yeah.
And, you too could be a co-host of Primitive Culture. Or at least our number one fan. Cool. Thank you, both of you, and see you soon, I hope. Join the conversation about your favourite corner of the Star Trek universe and beyond. You'll find us wherever you get your podcasts. If you're an Apple user, be sure to hit the subscribe button in Apple Podcasts on iPhone, iPad, or Apple TV, or the desktop iTunes app to get the latest episodes as soon as they're published. And please leave us a star rating and a written review. If you're not an Apple user, we've got you covered as well. You can find our shows on Google Play Music, Stitcher, TuneIn, Spreaker, SoundCloud, Windows Phone, in most third-party apps, and you can stream and download the MP3 file from our website or grab the RSS link. We'd love to hear your thoughts on today's show, and there are many ways for you to do that. The best place to join in the larger conversation is the Babel Conference, our listeners group on Facebook. Just type Babel, B-A-B-E-L, into the search field on Facebook and it should come right up. If you'd like to send us an email, you can use the form on our website at trek.fm/contact. Choose to send to a show and select Primitive Culture, and that will come right to us. You can also find the network on Twitter at TrekFM and on Facebook at facebook.com/TrekFM. If you'd like to help us keep all our shows coming to you each week, you can become a patron of the network on Patreon. Visit patreon.com/TrekFM. That's patreon.com/TrekFM to get all the details. Perks include early access to episodes, exclusive content, producer credits, and more, available through our special patrons website, Patron Zone. It requires a great deal of money to produce, host, and distribute these shows each month, so we really appreciate any support you can give us, and we hope you'll join the team. Again, you can find all our details at patreon.com/TrekFM. We'd like to take a moment now to thank our associate producers on Primitive Culture, Amy Nelson, Clara Cook, and Tony Black. Amy is a presenter of many other shows on the network, and you can find her on Twitter at Miss Amy Nelson. Clara and Tony were two of the former co-hosts of this show, and they'll be popping back from time to time. You can find Clara on Twitter at ClaraJeanMC, and Tony at AJ Black Writer.
You're blended all right.
Today, I'm joined by two very special guests, Tony Black and Clara Cook. Hi, both of you. How are you doing? Anyone jump in? Sorry. Okay. Hi, right. Clara. How are you?
Thank you. I'm good.
Let's try that again. I'll do that bit again.
We're too polite, Clara, aren't we? We're both doing the same thing.
Someone's going to have to talk about it. Who's it going to be?
Okay, right, okay. Hi, both of you. How are you doing?
You go first.
Right, okay.
This is not a video podcast.
I'll go first, Clara. I'll go first.
Okay, Tony will go first. Right, okay.
Take three.